parte, 269 millones de gastos de campaña, 25 millones serán para actividades específicas y otros 25 millones de este presupuesto para impulsar el liderazgo igualmente de las mujeres. El PRD tendrá 414 millones de pesos para gastos ordinarios, además 124 millones para gastos de campaña, como usted lo está viendo en pantalla, 11 millones para actividades específicas y
Unplugged in, attack on the Capitol. President Donald Trump faces another impeachment as Americans try to understand the violence that unfolded at the home of the U.S. Congress.
We've never had a siege of the U.S. Capitol. We've never had somebody break in a mob and create mayhem like this.
Many questions remain about how the mob of Trump supporters could breach the symbol of American democracy, leaving 5 people dead, including a U.S. Capitol police officer.
But this clearly caught the security forces off guard.
Social media moves to silence the president as we examine the attack's impact on American politics and society. Unplugged in, attack on the Capitol. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren, reporting from Washington, D.C. For the second time, President Donald Trump faces impeachment. Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives introduced articles of impeachment charging the president with incitement of deadly violence on the U.S. Capitol. In the wake of the January 6th attack, several cabinet secretaries and other Trump administration officials have resigned their posts. The president's social media accounts have been muted, including a permanent ban from Twitter. VOA congressional correspondent Katherine Gibson reports on Democrats' options for removing Trump just days before his term ends.
One week after pro-Trump protesters invaded the U.S. Capitol to overturn the counting of Electoral College votes, certifying President-elect Joe Biden's win, House Democrats have the votes to impeach President Donald Trump, charging he incited that riot. Trump on Tuesday disavowed the violence, speaking in public for the first time since the riot. Instead, he blamed opposition Democrats for moving to impeach him a second time.
It's really a terrible thing that they're doing. For Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to continue on this path, I think it's causing tremendous danger to our country, and it's causing tremendous anger. I want no violence.
Vice President Mike Pence met with Trump Tuesday for the first time since the January 6th riot. And it appears he will not answer Democrats' calls to invoke the 25th Amendment, declaring Trump incapacitated and temporarily removing him from office. Trump cabinet members declined to address such a move.
I'm not going to get into or discuss the 25th Amendment here.
Democrats say that leaves them no choice but to impeach the president with just days left in his term.
Removal is the main consequence of being convicted, and that is moot once his term is over. But there is another consequence, which is disqualification from holding future office.
One Republican senator says Trump's behavior already prevents a possible 2024 presidential run.
I don't think he's a viable candidate for office ever again because of the outrageous behavior in the post-election period.
Most Republicans are standing by Trump, but new Republican House Representative Madison Cawthorn, who is at the president's rally just before the riot, says he went too far.
He never should have directed that crowd towards the Capitol building because they, there was a bad outcome was destined at that point.
A Senate impeachment trial of Trump would run well past his time in office. President-elect Biden telling reporters that trial does not necessarily delay the work of his administration, including a new COVID aid package.
We go half day on dealing with the impeachment and half day getting my people nominated and confirmed in the Senate, as well as moving on the package.
Katherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
One U.S. Capitol police officer, Brian Sicknick, died from injuries sustained in the attack. One attacker was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer, while 3 others in the mob died after medical emergencies. Federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies are making arrests of those involved in the attack, and threats of further attacks are being investigated. But major questions remain about how the mob was able to organize and quickly overrun officers protecting the U.S. Capitol building. Some Capitol police officers are being investigated for their possible roles in the attack. Terrence Gaynor was chief of the Capitol Police from 2002 to 2006. We talked about this incident, future plots, and protecting the U.S. Capitol in the days leading up to President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. In terms of Washington, D.C., there are a number of police forces and security. Who protects the U.S. Capitol?
The United States Capitol Police is responsible for the Capitol complex, the office buildings, hundreds of offices of the members of the Senate and the House around the United States, and the members themselves. And then when constitutional officers or dignitaries are on the Hill, it's the responsibility of the Capitol Police in conjunction, with the Secret Service or the State Department officials.
About how many are employed in the Capitol Police?
Well, the total is about 2,700, but as a rule, there are enough officers to handle most events, and they do. When the events are going to get bigger, again, like the State of the Union or the inauguration or large marches, peaceful or protest, they can handle that, even if they're loud and boisterous. And even if there's minor violations about blocking a sidewalk or not having the proper permit, you could put up with that. But this clearly caught the security forces off guard.
So you coordinate if you know something's going to happen with the D.C. police. What about the Defense Department, our military?
The use of the National Guard is not the normal way to do it. If in a large event, you might call in specialty units of the military to be there, medical people on standby, people who could handle chemical warfare would be on standby. But for an event like this, if you did use the National Guard, it would be for intersection control and support of law enforcement. This type of event really required the coordination of law enforcement on the Capitol with the Metropolitan Police, Arlington County, Fairfax County, and those are counties for your listeners that are contiguous to the District of Columbia, as well as the federal authorities.
All right, about 18 or 16 blocks from the Capitol is the White House, where the president lives and works. It is fortified. There's a big fence around it. You've got a lot of security there. I go in and out of the U.S. Capitol as a journalist, and it does not have that level of fortification. It seems more open. Would you agree with that suggestion?
Yes, it's dangerously open, but it's exactly the symbol that everybody wants to send, and the members want that activity and people close. As a security expert, you're nervous about it. And we had alternatives suggested about large fences that were tastefully done, where people could come in 24/7, but it's just not the look that a lot of people like.
It would be helpful to know if you're going to have trouble. Is the Capitol Police, do they have help from the FBI or from other law enforcement to tell them what's on the internet, for instance, what might be the possible chatter, warning them of danger?
Well, not only are they partners with other agencies in sharing intelligence, the Capitol Police has a robust intelligence unit of its own, but they also have people assigned to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, and they have personnel assigned to the Secret Service or the Secret Service up on the Hill. So one would think that should have been good cooperation. Now, you and your viewers may be aware that the chief now who has resigned indicated that he asked for certain additional protections for which the police board wouldn't give. There has to be conversations about that. But even that request doesn't free up the chief from them reaching out to police departments if he couldn't get National Guard to get help from other people. You've been in Washington long enough to know, Greta, that there's a council of government and there's a lot of activities being the multiple police departments within the city and in those counties surrounding the city.
All right. On the 20th, we have an inauguration of a new president, President Biden. I suspect that we'll have a tremendous amount of security on that day. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. There's already some 16,000 military personnel up there. The planning for that has been going on for over a year, as it was when I ran some of those operations. And there'll be some 5,000 law enforcement officers from the United States to be brought in the counties to supplement the Secret Service, the FBI, and the Capitol Police. I am confident the inauguration of the next president of the United States will come off smoothly.
Chief, thank you very much. Miss you on Capitol Hill.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
While Democrats turn to impeachment as their way to hold President Trump accountable for the attack, Republicans in Congress are split on what to do and how to do it. Plugged-in Steve Reddish explains the political peril Republicans face with an impeachment vote.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States.
Objections by congressional Republicans to the constitutionally required ceremony of counting the electoral votes certifying that Democrat Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election were expected. But a riot by supporters of President Donald Trump and his unfounded claims that the election was fraudulent broke open the growing cracks in Trump's Republican wall of support.
The Republican Party, unfortunately, has become really a cult of personality. And as I said, to be a Republican means to support President Trump no matter what.
But tireless loyalty from Vice President Mike Pence ended Wednesday, telling supporters what he told Trump the day before. He has no power to subvert the election results. Trump kept up the pressure on Pence during a rally near the White House hours before the count began.
All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify, and we become president, and you are the happiest people.
Before the mob breached the Capitol, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell warned his colleagues of the political peril they faced by objecting.
The Constitution gives us here in Congress a limited role. The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever.
Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri was the first to sponsor an objection to the electoral vote count. After the rioters were dispersed and order restored in the Senate, Hawley remained undeterred, even as the rioting had tightened the resolve of Democrats and some Republicans to approve Biden's win.
To those who say that this is just a formality today, an antique ceremony that we've engaged in for a couple of hundred years, I can't say that I agree. The opportunity to be heard, to register objections is very vital, because this is the place where those objections are to be heard and dealt with, debated, and finally resolved.
Senator Mitt Romney, the Republican nominee for president in 2012, took the young senator and others to task for supporting Trump's unfounded claims of election fraud.
No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun.
And in the waning days of his single term, Trump faces the possibility of a second impeachment vote, which may force members of his own party to make a stand one way or another. Steve Reddish, VOA News, Washington.
Many involved in the attack made their intentions known through social media, and social media is playing a role in naming and shaming participants who were shown in photos and videos, some of which were self-streamed. The decision by social media company Twitter to permanently suspend President Donald Trump's account raises broader questions about the boundaries between censorship and freedom of speech. VOA's Tina Trin has more.
Last week's violence at the U.S. Capitol came after weeks of social media activity by President Donald Trump and others. Facebook was one meeting place.
When you've got 3 billion people on a platform that is optimized for maximum engagement with no check from government, that's how we got where we are.
Social media giants such as Facebook, Twitter, and Snap responded by suspending or outright banning President Trump and some supporters' accounts. There's an effort to remove content such as the phrase "Stop the Steal," a rallying cry for those who say Trump really won the presidential election. Amazon Web Services, the web hosting provider for Parler, a conservative alternative to Twitter, took it offline, while Google and Apple banned the app from its app stores. Those who lost their digital perch are crying foul. Others say the shutdowns came too late and don't go far enough. There are renewed calls for laws on online speech in a push to reduce the power that tech companies have. Experts say more attention is needed as to what happens after so-called deplatforming.
That's the phase we're in right now, and it could be incredibly dangerous if we don't take that moment seriously.
Megan Squire is a professor at Elon University who studies the online activity of extremist groups.
It's not enough to just wash your hands of a person and say, well, they're not on my platform anymore. It really is what happens next.
And what happens next is pretty predictable, says Squire. Movement to alternative or alt-tech sites like Telegram surged in the wake of mainstream sites' actions.
A couple of the channels that I was watching were growing at 100 and 200%.
For the internet giants like Facebook, Google's YouTube, and Twitter, this should be their moment of reckoning, says Jesse Larrick, co-founder of nonprofit Accountable Tech.
Their tools have been recruiters in many ways for these extremist movements. And so it's not enough to take action on individual pieces of content or individual users even. Like, they have to grapple with the extent to which they've been a primary driving force of all of this.
As the U.S. continues to learn more about what led to the chaos in the nation's capital, questions remain about the future of speech online. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
Law enforcement officials around the country are on alert for any attempts to disrupt the peaceful transition of power that has marked every U.S. election. For some perspective, I talked to historian Douglas Brinkley. We discussed the attack on Capitol Hill and how the country moves forward.
American history's been long. We've had dark moments, difficult moments before. This is nothing today like the Civil War, where our whole country, we lost 800,000 people on the land of the United States. But it is an awful lot like the most tumultuous period of the 1960s, perhaps 1968, when Martin Luther King was killed and Bobby Kennedy killed, and the utter chaos at the Chicago Democratic Convention, and folding into the following year with Kent State massacre and Jackson State. That would be the Nixon period. It would be, to me, what this is most like. What is different is we've never had a siege of the U.S. Capitol. We've never had somebody break in a mob and create mayhem like this. So that stands alone. And the fact that President Trump might be impeached twice, not once, like Bill Clinton and Andrew Johnson, will stand out in history.
Was the U.S. government ever at risk of collapsing with these events?
No, we were never going to collapse. The United States is built very strong. I mean, we might be, if you just think in terms of power and money and, what it represents, the United States isn't a fig leaf that just falls off and allows disarray to happen. So we were okay. And we're going to continue to be okay in the United States.
You talk about sort of the disruption in the Republican Party. Did they do things consistent with the Constitution and with statutes?
I think things were consistent with the Constitution up to around the time Mitch McConnell called Joe Biden and said, "You're the next president, congratulations." And Mitch McConnell did that after Trump did so many legal cases that he came up empty-handed on. And I think that's the pivot point. I mean, Trump had the right to contest the election for a while, but once he failed in all the courts, he continued in the public theater, particularly with platforms on social media and the like, about it being stolen when our courts, our judicial system said no. The Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it because it seemed far-fetched to them. That was the pivot point. If Trump at that point would have maybe continued to gripe, but didn't try to raise troops to protest Biden being president, he would have been a lot better off. His presidency deteriorated in early 2021, and by January 6th, it's going to be the dark stain on Trump's legacy.
Can a president pardon himself?
Never been tried before. It would be novel. Most constitutional lawyers feel that he will fail, and so it's a waste of time. But until it goes to the courts, we don't know. That was why the 25th Amendment was sort of an interesting moment where Mike Pence could have invoked the 25th with cabinet officers saying Trump should not be president anymore, and then pardoned Trump. And then he would have had a foolproof pardon for himself, Donald Trump. By self-pardoning, he's going to lead it up. It's going to become a very fierce legal fight.
All right. In terms of a president leaving the White House, obviously, if you die, that's one way to leave it. But a president can resign. You talk about the 25th Amendment, which would, and I want you to explain that to our viewers, 25th Amendment, and then there's a procedure called impeachment. But explain the 25th Amendment.
25th Amendment came out of 1967, but it was when it was passed. But Bobby Kennedy was one of the big progenitors of it, and it was a fear of disarray. If what happened in Dallas, what would have happened if John F. Kennedy stayed alive but was not able to function as president? What's the whole chain of command? It got revisited, and this formula came up. If the vice president and 6 cabinet members were able to say they're not fit for command, then they can evoke the 25th. It hasn't really worked, meaning we haven't been able to put the 25th into serious action. People have used it, though. I mean, it's been used when you get a colonoscopy for a day. It's used when Ronald Reagan had a type of colon cancer operation, and then it reverts back. So we've used the 25th before, but in this case, the 25th was about sending Donald Trump off to Mar-a-Lago and having Mike Pence be president for a few days. The 25th, in essence, was used for Nixon and Gerald Ford. A deal was made at that point. So, I mean, it's viable, but Pence and Trump have been too close. One never imagined that Pence would want to go to so far and try to oust Trump after they've worked together quite well for 8 years.
Unless, of course, there were a deal made between the two of them where President Trump resigned and turned the responsibilities over to Vice President Pence for a couple of days, who could then, of course, I assume, pardon him.
I thought that was what was going to happen. I thought after Georgia, Donald Trump was going to give a speech and then go back to golfing, say, I'm leaving to Mar-a-Lago, I'm leaving with Mike Pence, and have Pence give him a pardon and his family a pardon, and say, I'm coming back. I'm the comeback kid, 2024, look for me, Donald Trump. Because then as ex-president, he wouldn't have all of these legal issues swirling around him. Yes, he'd have the New York Southern District problems. Yes, he would have perhaps a legal case going on in Georgia over intimidation of the Secretary of State there. There are other lawsuits, but now if he doesn't pardon himself, he may have the power of the U.S. federal government really going after him, and you're going to have banks calling in their loans on Donald Trump, and as I said, social media platforms taken away from him. He's going to be on an island of his own there at Mar-a-Lago in a few days.
You've said that President Trump, if he's impeached by Congress, will be the first president to be impeached twice. Is that right?
That's right. I think the misunderstanding, Greta, about impeachment is that people assume if you're impeached, you leave office. And that's not the case, because first you have to go through Congress. So Congress impeached Bill Clinton for Monica Lewinsky-related factors of dishonesty. You had Andrew Johnson impeached by Congress, but they survived in the Senate. Getting 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to oust the person is a very high bar. Now, So what Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are doing is saying it's such a moral outrage what happened at the siege of the Capitol, the insurrection of Trump, that we're going to do an immediate vote. And because it's a majority Democratic House, they will vote for impeachment. And that moment, anybody in the world can say Donald Trump's been impeached twice. Then it goes to a trial in the Senate, and that 2/3 is a high bar. However, Mitch McConnell, as of the time of our talking here, is saying he thinks that what Trump did is impeachable. And so there's suddenly this specter that there could be a Senate trial before January 20th. We'll have to see.
Even if he's impeached, can he run again in 2024?
He's impeached by Congress, yes. If there's a Senate trial in which they find a way to punish him in a way that he can't run again by stripping him of the ability to do that, then he wouldn't be able to.
Can Biden really move us forward out of this nightmare?
I have a feeling once Biden and Harris are inaugurated on January 20th, you'll see a kind of unity for a little while, maybe 100 days on a COVID-19 stimulus package, and probably a repackaging of the vaccines for the United States to continue with Operation Warp Speed, maybe with a different name by Joe Biden. But COVID is going to be first and foremost. There needs to be unifying the country right now. Donald Trump, as ex-president, is going to face his own lawsuits. We'll have to see if he self-pardons himself or not. Things will unspool here in the next few days. But it was not a glorious end to Trump's one-term presidency.
Doug, thank you as always.
Greta, thank you for what you do.
As political unrest unfolded in the nation's capital last week, leaders around the world reacted, with America's allies and adversaries weighing in on the violence. VOA's Henry Ridgwell tells us more from London.
European allies watched with dismay as the violence unfolded at the US Capitol Wednesday.
What happened today in Washington, D.C. is not America. Definitely.
This democracy is stronger than the attackers and the rioters.
On Twitter, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson called the violence disgraceful. His Interior Minister Priti Patel blamed President Donald Trump.
His comments directly led to the violence, and so far he's failed to condemn that violence, and that is completely wrong.
NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg tweeted, "Shocking scenes in Washington, D.C. The outcome of this democratic election must be respected." A spokesman for the United Nations Secretary General said it is important that political leaders impress on their followers the need to refrain from violence. Israel's leader expressed support for his country's chief ally.
American democracy has always inspired me. Lawlessness and violence are the opposite of the values we know Americans and Israelis cherish.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrote on Twitter, "The democratic process cannot be allowed to be subverted through unlawful protests." Meanwhile, US rivals taunted Washington. In a televised speech, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said it showed how fragile and vulnerable Western democracy is. In a statement, Venezuela said the United States is suffering the same thing that it has generated in other countries with its policies of aggression. China attempted to twist the narrative.
The mainstream media in the United States have unanimously condemned this as a violent incident, using words like thugs, extremists, villains, and disgrace. However, what words did they use to describe the violent protesters in Hong Kong? They said it was a beautiful sight and profiled violent protesters as democratic heroes and said that the American people stand with them.
Moscow's deputy UN ambassador Dmitry Polyansky compared the violence to the 2014 revolution in Ukraine, writing on Twitter, quite Maidan-style pictures are coming from DC. US allies share the pain of many Americans watching the violence at the heart of its democracy. Many foes are using the events as an opportunity to settle scores. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
That's all the time we have for now. Thank you to my guests, biographer and presidential historian Douglas Brinkley and former Capitol Hill Police Chief Terrence Gaynor. Stay up to date on the latest news at our website, voanews.com, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Greta. Thank you for being plugged in. Unplugged in, the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The 46th American president is sworn in on the steps of the scarred U.S. Capitol, guarded by thousands of troops around an empty city deserted after protest and pandemic. American history is made with the first woman inaugurated as vice president. Joe Biden laid out his vision for his presidency. Unplugged in, the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren, reporting from Washington, D.C. Unlike many other countries, the United States does not give, but lends powers to its leaders, and it is loaned in 4-year increments. And at noon on January 20th, that loan power was invested in Joseph R. Biden, who was inaugurated as the new U.S. president. At age 78, Biden is America's oldest president. Also sworn in, Kamala Harris as vice president, becoming the first woman to hold that position. The new president delivered his inauguration speech at the U.S. Capitol, where 2 weeks earlier there was an attack on the Capitol. Ordinarily, there are crowds for the president's inaugural speech, but not this time. This time, the National Mall is guarded by the National Guard troops standing by to repel the risk of a repeated attack. All this amid a coronavirus pandemic and sluggish U.S. economy. President Biden laid out his path forward, calling on all Americans to work together.
This is America's day. This is democracy's day. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken, the oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we the people who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war,
We've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, As the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all of those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. And there's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And will give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Before taking office, Joe Biden laid out a set of executive orders he will issue aimed at rolling back some of the most controversial actions of the Trump administration. He will also propose spending nearly $2 trillion to boost the economy and combat the coronavirus pandemic. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief for USA Today, and she has covered 6 White House administrations. We talked about the challenges facing the new Biden administration.
You know, Greta, it's true that every new president has challenges, but Joe Biden has more challenges, I think it's fair to say, than any president in modern times. And that starts with the pandemic that is still not under control now. More than 400,000 Americans have died. The vaccine rollout, which we're all grateful it started, but it's had a lot of bumps. He's got the economic consequences of that pandemic. Millions of Americans still out of work, some of them at risk of eviction and hunger. And he also has a really divided nation, which was exhibited to our horror by the January 6th assault on the Capitol.
Well, you talk about divide. I'll take that one first. Is the theme of his inauguration speech was unity. How does he achieve unity with 74 million people who wanted President Trump reelected?
You know, his challenge is even greater than all those Americans who voted for the other guy. He takes office in a situation where about a third of Americans don't believe he actually won the election. That, of course, is an argument that former President Trump now made without evidence since the election was held in November. So that's a special burden for Joe Biden. He handled it in his speech today the same way he's been handling it for some time during his campaign and since his election. And that is by saying, I want to be president of all the people. I want to be president of Americans, whether they supported me or not. He's really making an appeal to people on the other side. And that's not a thing every leader has done in the recent past. We'll see if it works.
I think many people would describe President Biden prior to now, he's vice president and senator, as a moderate. And he now has within his own party, as you noted, some people farther to the left of him. He has made promises to them. And so, it does suggest to me that it's going to be a heavy lift to try to get all his Democrats on one page.
Yeah, of course, he's moved a little to the left, as has his party. He is a more liberal politician than he was, say, at the point Obama chose him as his vice president. But he does have centrist instincts. It's almost like whatever you think about the policy, his personal approach is one that comes across as centrist, as can't we make a deal? Can't we find some common ground here? He has made several appointments. Some progressives are disappointed with the appointments he's made. Bernie Sanders, who was the progressive candidate for president, did not get a cabinet post as he wished, but he has appointed a lot of progressive voices, especially to second and third tier positions in agencies.
Many countries around the world have had women as their leaders. The United States has not, but we have now a woman vice president for the very first time. What do you think her impact will be?
Huge, huge, I think. Just the fact that that glass ceiling has finally been broken, I think, is an important message to women and girls in this country. You know, it's interesting, Greta, we have never had a female president. We now have another male president, but the number 2 in line of succession is a female, our first female vice president. Number 3 in line of succession is the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, the first woman ever to become Speaker of the House. So you do see progress being made. Number of women in Congress has gone up. And it was interesting in our November election, the number of Republican women in Congress went up. The Republican gains were by and large made by female challenger candidates. So we may see these things happening in both our parties.
Susan, thank you very much. Always nice to talk to you.
Greta, thank you.
Before Biden took the oath of office, Kamala Harris was sworn in as the new vice president. Harris is the first woman and first person of color to be U.S. vice president. She was a first-term senator from the state of California. Before that, she was California's attorney general. Harris attended Howard University, a prestigious historically black college in Washington, D.C. She earned a law degree at the University of California. The inauguration of a new president is accompanied by a trove of traditions, many of which are missing from this inauguration because of COVID and because of the state of alert due to the recent attack on the U.S. Capitol. Capricia Marshall was the White House chief of protocol during the first 4 years of the Obama administration. We talked about the logistics and protocols for this moment.
By this time, during a normal, inauguration, boy, oh boy, the streets would be packed, the hotels would be filled. You couldn't get a restaurant reservation, but regrettably, due to our COVID restrictions, which of course we need to adhere to, and then the recent events of just a couple weeks ago, there is a serious lockdown here in Washington, D.C. It is very unusual, and I have to say it's really disconcerting. I go on walks down and around the monuments on weekends. I couldn't do it. It was all blocked off. You could only get so far. And then you just see these high fences. You see this military presence. I mean, strong military presence, and they're not hiding their weaponry either. It is meant to deter. I'm glad it's deterring. I'm so happy it's keeping people safe, but it saddens me that we needed that. It saddens me because it is so contrary to what we stand for as a nation, to what our democracy stands for. This should be a peaceful time of transition. I have to really tip a hat to the inauguration committee that has put together just several days of true celebrations. They have just reconfigured how the country can experience, and perhaps even more people now experience, the celebration of Joe Biden taking the oath of office. The mall has exquisite flags that have been outlined there. The decor is just grand and certainly fitting of the occasion. The programming from moment to moment that anyone in America can tune into will be full of the showcasing the best of our country, the best artisans, the best poets, the best speakers, politicians, just extraordinary individuals. So I'm really in awe of what they did in a short period of time, because you do have to remember that the transition time was really condensed. Usually